Hey all you cats and kittens and all you non-binary fittins, it's your boy DBiddles. Welcome to Chatbots. What's Chatbots, I hear you asking? Alright, so get this. I have a great fondness for mecha anime, and they make these keen little model kits of all the cool robots from those anime. So what I do, right, is I put those kits together and talk about the anime that they're from. Give you a little synopsis of the plot and characters and themes, and then after I've said enough about that anime to set up a broader topic, I switch gears and start chatting about something else that kind of fits into the stuff I said about my anime robots. See how that works? You put some chat in, you pull a bot out, you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about. Couldn't be simpler. The only thing simpler is taking your finger or your mouse and giving it a little tap on the like button. And for those especially advanced and might I say strikingly good-looking viewers out there, maybe then you take your mouse or finger and go ahead and tap on that subscribe button right after, yeah? That'd be just grand. You know, I like to cover all sorts of the many different robot anime out there, but for the uninitiated, a lot of these kinda just end up falling into the overly generalized blanket term of Gundams. Kinda like how your grandparents just call all video games Nintendo, or how the TV show Seinfeld gets called a sitcom even though the title character is the least funny member of the cast, despite that being his in-universe job. But it's ironic because even in Gundam, not all the robots present are Gundams. Gundam is usually a specific model or specific class of what they call mobile suits. Though in case you ain't twigged it yet, this one today is, in fact, a true blue, honest-to-goodness Gundam. In fact, it's the Gundam, the grandpappy of them all. Kinda. I already have two of the RX-178s from the original 1979 Mobile Suit Gundam, but I think my favorite version of the UC Gundams is this one, the RX-178 Mark II AUG Custom from the sequel series, Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. I've talked about the original Gundam series before on this channel, but a lot of it has been talk around the original Gundam. And even here, a lot of this talk is going to have to be fairly light because the Gundam Universal Century, much like most of creator Yoshiyuki Tomino's work, is very dense with lore and characters. Gundam particularly so among Tomino's oeuvre, since it became such a massive hit as opposed to some of his other works like Ideon or Zabongol or Elgame. As such, I don't have exhaustive knowledge of everything Gundam, or even everything within the original UC timeline. So if some big-brain nerd feels compelled to correct me about anything I'm about to say, I hope they also include their name and mailing address so I'll know where to send the Smarty Pants medal to. Now normally, my talk about robot anime is just to facilitate some point about a very serious real-world topic, like systemic racism, or political violence, or the logistics of penis docking with dicks of various size and shape. But if you watched my last episode with Mazinger Z, which you're gonna want to have watched for the sake of this video, you'll remember we kind of did an analysis of Mazinger itself and the various historical and cultural influences on the mecha genre. And well, I kinda think we need to do something similar with our Gundam friend. If we were to compare robot anime to American comics, Mazinger and the subsequent trend of super robots could be comparable to the Golden Age superhero comics. Bright, campy, colorful, and for the most part, relatively straightforward. What you saw is what you got. Don't take that to mean that they were stupid, not at all. They were just, how you say, unburdened by complexity. But the industry received a swift kick in the pants with the advent of the Fantastic Four and the Silver Age Marvel Renaissance, or in our case, the debut of Gundam, which introduced more serialized storytelling with greater character depth, more elaborate world building, and the introduction of more real-world elements to the science fiction, thus earning it the subgenre heading of real robots. I've mentioned this in some of my other videos, but it bears repeating that Gundam was something of a sleeper hit. The TV series got cancelled early due to low viewership ratings, and the brand struggled because its initial set of toys produced by manufacturer Clover were off-model from the anime and didn't sell well as a result, particularly since the audience the series cultivated trended older, to demographics less inclined to buy toys. Actually, Tomino would go on record as stating that a large percentage of the original fanbase were young women and teenage girls, who really appreciated the focus on the more dramatic elements of the show. It wasn't until 1980, when Bandai bought out the toy rights from Clover, and 1981, when the first Gundam film compilation hit theaters, that more young men started finding the series and its popularity really skyrocketed. Bandai would produce what we know today as the Gunpla, plastic kits that could be assembled with glue and paint to make what is more of a model than an action figure, something that was much cheaper and more appealing to the older enthusiasts. God, I wish they were still that cheap. Meanwhile, the original film trilogy would condense the 43-episode anime series down into 3 theatrical-length films with new animation and slightly revised narrative, making the series more readily accessible to new fans. A lot happens in Gundam, enough that missing an episode or two might hurt your understanding of what's going on, something that wasn't a factor in, say, UFO Warrior Diapolon or Go Appa 5 Godam, where, aside from a few key episodes, you can come and go as you please and not miss too much. A cancelled cult hit TV show sadly doesn't see too many reruns, and home video hadn't yet become a common practice. So a few weeks at the box office for everyone to come and get a third of the series in their heads will do you wonders. And even before drawing in new fans, the premiere of the first movie was already something of a pretty exciting event, drawing a crowd of 15,000 people on the day of the debut in February 22nd, 1981. Enough that Japanese media and police anticipated riots, which might have happened had Tomino not given a big speech about the importance of animation and fiction and how the new generation would lead the way to a brighter future. One Japanese newspaper would refer to this event as the day that anime changed. Additionally, before the series had finished airing, Tomino, who feared his story might go unfinished due to early cancellation, wrote a 3-volume novelization of the story where he was free to add more mature storytelling details and themes, which really goes to show how passionate he was about this story. At time of writing, I have not read this novelization, and since it's so drastically different from the canon of the anime, I'm not gonna fret too much about it. Kind of like how I don't care too much about the Star Wars Expanded Universe novels either, even if Disney hadn't made them all non-canon. So suck it, nerds. I talked about World War II and the Meiji Restoration in my Mazinger video, and the roles all of those played in shaping the future of anime, manga, tokusatsu video games, and other forms of Japanese storytelling. And while certainly plenty happened between then and the advent of Gundam, it's clear that much of the thinking behind Gundam is still very much processing and reacting to those events. History is made every day, even in all the seemingly smaller, more mundane happenings. But while American occupation and post-war reconstruction presented many more contemporary developments, it was hard to deny that the war was something of a flashpoint for so many. And with political leadership allowed to stay in office after the war ended, with many people hardened and embittered by Japan's defeat, and with corporatism on the rise, it was easy for many to believe that their country hadn't quite learned the lessons it needed to in order to grow past the things that led them to that flashpoint in the first place. This is reflected in some of Gundam's contemporaries, other massively influential works such as Space Battleship Yamato, Demon City Shinjuku, Fist of the North Star, Space Pirate Captain Harlock, Area 88, Barefoot Gen, Akira, Vampire Hunter D, Galaxy Express 39, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Onwards Towards Our Noble Deaths, and many others I couldn't even think to mention, not including the many subsequent Real Robot series that clearly resonated with Gundam's message. So here we go, plot synopsis time. Tuck in, folks, it's a lengthy one. In the not-too-distant future, the human population exceeds 9 billion people, leading to overpopulation and food scarcity. This necessitates the colonization of space and the relocation of much of humanity to those colonies, whilst the Earth ecosystem restores itself, thereby kicking off a new era of humanity with a new calendar, heretofore referred to as the Universal Century. Meanwhile, much of the wealthiest and most powerful folks on Earth, from the wealthiest and most powerful nations, are able to stay on terra firma and form a united human government known as the Earth Federation. Notice how even though humanity is now concerned with resource scarcity, there are still hyper-wealthy folks who are likely feeling the pang of empty bellies a lot less severely than those folks that they're choosing to fire off into space. Always a tragedy for the poor, never for the rich. The rich just have investments to protect. But not everyone who stays on Earth is 1%ers. After all, somebody has to be on hand to be butlers or personal chefs or chauffeurs or secretaries or whatever. What, you expect rich people to do that shit themselves? They didn't get rich from working hard, goddammit, they got rich by having other people work hard for them. However, enough of the remaining Earthnoids are 1%ers that the perception of Earthborn elites is a prevailing sentiment. Also, not to get too in the weeds, but there's some deliberate ambiguity over how much legal ruling authority the Earth Federation has over the colonies that further drives a wedge between those living on Earth and those who don't. My fellow Amerikitties will remember that old line from elementary school history class about taxation without representation, and yeah, kinda similar vibes here. The Spacenoids end up with a raw deal under the Earth Federation. But despite this, the colonies did thrive with the resources available to them, while Earth would stagnate somewhat, which would see the rise of a class of nouveau riche out in space, and some resentment on behalf of the old money Earthnoids. UC calendar year 0068 sees the death of philosopher and much beloved head of the space colony Side 3, Zeonzum Daikun. And with this tragic and somewhat suspect passing, his opportunistic right-hand man, Degwin Zabi, assumes Daikun's place as head of Side 3, which he renames to the Principality of Zeon. From there, the Zabi family begins to stir secessionist sentiments among many Spacenoids, advocating that force would be necessary to achieve Spacenoid independence from the Earth Federation, and most of Degwin's children would find themselves being appointed to positions of power in politics and the military. His eldest son, Girin, would actually assume a high level of power and influence due to his cunning and charisma at playing politic, and his following would actually surpass that of his father due to his ability to instill strong emotions of nationalistic pride among the Zeonic rank and file. During this time, much research and scientific development was made into the field of mobile suit technology, originally intended for industry out in the vacuum of space, but it quickly adopted into military functions for the Principality. And that new tech comes in handy because in UC 0079, the Principality stopped talking about secession and started fighting. The first few months of what would come to be known as the One-Year War are fucking brutal. Supposedly, the entirety of the human population on Earth and in space is reduced by 50% during the course of this war. That's billions dead according to the lore. I mean, Earth's population was over 9 billion 79 years prior. Just imagine how many people there are in an age of seeming prosperity where we have the whole solar system to stretch out our legs in. In those early days, Zeon carried out Operation British, a mission which dropped Space Colony Side 2 onto Australia, destroying 16% of the continent's landmass. That's right, an entire fucking nation-state was dropped through the atmosphere as a bomb. The thinking was that a swift and devastating victory would end the war quickly. And did Zeon evacuate Side 2 before they dropped it? Go fuck yourself, they did not. They would have done it again too with Side 5, but that would be the ill-fated site of the Battle of Loam, where nuclear and chemical weapons rendered the entire colony uninhabitable, again, without having evacuated the citizens from said colony first. Loam would lead to the signing of the Antarctic Treaty, which would forbid further use of nuclear and biological warfare, as well as the use of colony drops. Something you'd think wouldn't need to be said. And the treaty would also allow for neutral colonies to be established, should any of the remaining ones like to opt out of the conflict. You know, in case they were party poopers who for some reason didn't want to be dropped through the atmosphere onto occupied land masses. The original 1979 Gundam series' Episode 1 picks up from this point in the war on the neutral colony of Side 7, where our hero, Amuro Ray, and his friends and neighbors live until Side 7 is invaded by Zeon troops. Well, fuck me, so much for that treaty. Why are the Zeegs here? Well, apparently the Feddies have been using Side 7 as the hiding spot for their engineering team, which was developing the Federation's line of mobile suits, consisting of the RX-75 gun tank, the RX-77 gun cannon, the Pegasus-class battleship known as the White Base, and our titular RX-78 Gundam, that Amuro's father had apparently been in charge of engineering. And naturally, this necessitates a few rookie soldiers be on hand to keep watch. Well, double Dutch, fuck me, so much for that treaty. With the colony's hull penetrated and Zeon troops pouring in, The surviving civilian populace and the few rookie Federation troops climb aboard the White Base to make their escape, and Amuro climbs into the Gundam to defend them as they flee, him having once-overed his dad's design documents, which is evidently enough to pilot a giant battle robot. And so, the original series from that point follows this ragtag bunch of children conscripted into a war that they aren't trained for and want no part of, using experimental weapons to defend themselves from the pursuing enemy soldiers who want to prevent the Federation from getting hands on said experimental weapons. All sounds pretty complicated, right? Well, it is, but it isn't. On the one hand, it very much is. The Federation and Zeon both have legitimate grievances with each other. The Federation's top-heavy and dysfunctional liberalism has led to stagnation and corruption in how any system of governance functions. I mean, these are basically the same people who were in charge when the planet got fucked up so badly that people had to emigrate to space en masse in order to survive. And now, due to their continued attempts to control things, they're overextending themselves, exploiting the colonies who don't have enough representative say in how they're run, and some very sound and passionate criticism is now being leveled at how they run things. They're the de facto heroic faction of the one-year war by virtue of not dropping colonies full of people through the atmosphere, but in the aftermath, their attempts to micromanage and maintain order on the colonies in the various Gundam sequel series leads to them being the villains often enough, either directly or through ineptitude and apathy in regards to governing people. And on the other hand, the false populism of Zeon is very clearly just the co-opting of those legitimate frustrations by ambitious and hateful parties who seek dominance through utter brutality. Their top brass shows no compunction with high death tolls as a means of achieving their ends. The Zombie family were the ones who orchestrated the assassination of Zeon Zum Daikun for the sake of taking up his place as leaders of the anti-Earthnoid movement. Gasps, shock and awe! Who could have seen that twist coming? Daikun's cause was a righteous one, but the Zombies gradually twisted. Degwin at one point even explicitly compares Gihren to Adolf Hitler as a warning about his unhinged behavior, a sentiment Gihren takes a shine to as he calls for the dominance of the Space Noid race and the further reduction of the human population to a much smaller, more manageable size, basically advocating for the genocide of anyone who does not align with Zeon. And before anyone accuses me of clean Wehrmachting these guys, it's not just the Zombies who are exclusively at fault either, as later incarnations of the Zeon movement seem to share these fanatical sentiments, and the penchant for colony drops as a means of achieving these goals, despite most of the Zombie family being dead by that point. Zeon is undeniably a fascist movement. That much should have been clear to everyone around the time they started resorting to colony drops. And it's interesting how quickly its leaders turned from using grievance in order to fuel a power play for oligarchical autonomy into ideologically motivated ethno-nationalism. In the sequels, other factions have to be introduced into the mix to give the audience clearer, slightly less morally compromised protagonists to root for. Notice I said slightly. And this complicated situation is muddied further by the fact that not every representative of these factions is always a clear goodie or baddie. They're people. People just trying to get by. People just hoping for a better and safer world to live in. People who get swept up into bad movements. Sometimes they're jerkasses, to be sure, but not always jerkasses enough that they deserve to die. The original series gives a lot of instances of the Zeon forces, enemy combatants to the crew of the protagonists aboard the White Base, who demonstrate real humanity. Not all of them are as fanatical about the eugenics element and out-and-out fascism that Gihren starts leaning into later in the series. A lot of them are clearly just interested in winning their independence. There's an instance early on where the White Base drops off some elderly civilians who no longer wish to be aboard the battleship while it's under fire from Zeon, and a couple of Zeon scouts witness this and drop off a box of rations for said civilians. Or there's Miharu, a teenage girl who gets paid by Zeon forces to spy on the White Base, work she only takes because her and her two younger siblings are now war orphans. And of course, there's fan favorite Ramba Ral, high-ranking Zeon officer who pilots the dreaded MS-07 Goof mobile suit that gives the Gundam a run for its money, but not before Ral buys and shares a meal with Amuro, seemingly fully aware that the boy is at least Federation aligned, if not a full combatant. Not to mention Ramba Ral's lover and aide, Crowley Hamon, who bitterly pledges herself to a suicidal revenge strike against the White Base in her grief over Ral's death. Meanwhile, not every member of the Federation forces are noble and heroic. After a long and arduous trek to deliver the White Base to Federation Command, our heroes are commended for their efforts and then sent to the front line, Command having been so impressed by their performance that they want to make them a key squadron in the war effort, despite most of them being literal goddamn children who never enlisted or received formal training. They further demonstrate their cluelessness by awarding post-mortem promotions and medals to fallen members of the White Base crew, something Amuro becomes infuriated by. And in the wake of the victory over the Zeon, not only does the Federation continue developing arms, some of which break the Antarctic Treaty, fuck me thrice on that treaty now, but they also employ the unsupervised authoritarian quote-unquote peacekeeping force known as the Titans to root out Spacenoid secessionists and remnants of Zeon. The Titans' heavy-handed tactics are a lot closer to Zeon's than anyone would have liked, with them resorting to all manner of cold-blooded collective punishment on anyone even vaguely advocating Spacenoid independence, such as the Anti-Earth Unification Group, or the AUG for short. The AUG are a grassroots movement for Spacenoid liberation, who deliberately try to avoid endangering civilians, and they prove so frustrating to the Earth Federation that the Titans eventually try to ally themselves with a Neo-Zeon group to fight against the AUG. To repeat, the Federation is so committed to rooting out sentiments similar to Zeon that they hire a bunch of psychopaths who act like and ally with Neo-Zeon in order to quash a group that takes a principled stance against behaving like Zeon. And they can do all this because the Earth Federation never had enough oversight over the Titans' actions, and the Feddies ceded too much of their military to the Titans before they realized what a bunch of freaks they were. Guess there's no background checks or psych evaluations in the Federation. When the Federation disavows the rogue Titans, they then throw their hands up and entrust the defeat of the Titans to AUG, and suggest that maybe they could enlist the help of those Neo-Zeon guys to take the Titans down. Oh, I see, so the Federation doesn't actually care who's doing what to whom or how many people get needlessly hurt. They only really care about protecting their hegemonic control over everyone and everything. Titans, Zeon, AUG, whatever, just make sure to keep the noise down so that we can keep counting our money in peace. Hell, it's not like Zeon's all that different from the Federation when it gets right down to it. Zeon just wants to be the one sitting in the Federation's big bougie chair, consolidating power and counting big stacks of cash. And that's to say nothing of Anaheim Electronics, an arms manufacturer who supplies the Federation with new mobile suits, but isn't above playing both sides in a lot of conflicts for the sake of profit, such as when they start financially backing the AUG. It's almost like they have a fiduciary interest in keeping the pot stirred so they can keep selling weapons. So it's wall-to-wall assholes in the world of Universal Century, with plenty of needless death and senseless cruelty on innocents to go around. One of the few bright spots for humanity ironically comes in one of the elements that much of the Gundam fandom resents, the new types, who are kinda like the UC's version of the Jedi, which is to say that new types are confusing, ill-defined, new-agey psychic/spiritual empaths who are extra good at piloting mobile suits. They're supposedly the next step in human evolution that arises from mankind leaving Earth for the stars. According to the lore, humanity leaving the Earth sphere and entering the cosmos unlocks our latent cosmic awareness, giving us a greater capacity for precognition, intuiting others around us, and maybe being able to psychically use specially designed mobile suit accessories. It kind of brings to mind that time in 2021 when William Shatner went into space aboard a suborbital capsule and came back all introspective. At one point in the sequel series Zeta Gundam, they described the non-psychic old types as people whose souls are weighed down by Earth's gravity, which is a really cool poetic line, right up until they keep using it, kind of like Robert Kirkman title-dropping The Walking Dead in Rick Grimes' dialogue. So I guess they mean that as the literal canon explanation for new types. Whatever. Possibly the most iconic and famous, or perhaps infamous instance of what the fanbase refers to as new type bullshit is Amuro's encounter with Lala Soon, a Zeon new-type soldier and protege of Amuro's Zeon rival, Char Aznable. They meet once prior in person, where Amuro is able to pass as a civilian unbeknownst to the notorious Char. Lala and Amuro are only briefly acquainted in person before separating and next meeting on the battlefield. And in a fateful battle between the two, before the Gundam can land a killing strike on Char, Amuro and Lala's emerging new type abilities allow them to form a deep, intimate psychic connection on the astral plane, where they are able to see and know each other fully, communicate without boundaries, recognize each other's humanity, experience each other's souls, and fall deeply and tragically in love for one brief, beautiful star-crossed moment. A moment cut short by the Gundam's already in motion beam saber, destroying Lala's mobile armor, which dives between the attack and Char's Gelgoog, thus protecting Char and ending Lala's life. None of the three are ideologues in the conflict at this point in the story. Hell, they're all barely more than children, swept up in forces beyond their control. Char is secretly Casval Rem Daikun, the son of Zeonzum Daikun, and he's out for revenge against the Zabis for killing his dad, using his military accomplishments under a false identity to get close to them, like he's Sweeney Todd out for Judge Turpin. Char doesn't like the Federation, but he's taking part in Zeon missions mostly just so he can get close enough to slip the knife in on people wearing the most suitably impressive Prussian-style uniforms. Funny thing, during this particular encounter he attacks Sayla Mass, who has accompanied Amuro on this mission, and Sayla is actually Artesia Som Daikun, his long-lost little sister. Meanwhile, Amuro was a bystander at the start of the series who got dragged into this mess, and he now recognizes the threat of the Zeon movement and likewise wants to put an end to the Zabis, but not because he likes the Federation or anything. He and Char both joined the AU Genzeta Gundam. And Lala is merely infatuated with Char and has pledged her life to defending him after he rescued her from the mobsters whom she was working for in the desperate hopes of providing for her family, who has been impoverished due to the war's devastation. The three actually seem to have pretty similar goals, namely freedom from war and oppression and the end of the powerful forces who capitalize on such. They're all three of them corners of a love triangle who, if circumstances had been different, might have been great friends or allies. It's a moment that seems very hokey and abrupt and maudlin, and fair's fair, it surely is. Definitely a subplot that kind of got thrown together and implemented on the fly rather than meticulously thought out and planned. Romance would come to be a recurring weakness for Gundam, either doomed to end in tragedy or to be poorly implemented and forced on characters who have basically no pre-existing chemistry with each other. But, say what you will, I think this instance at least has merit as more than just tragedy bait. It highlights just how deeply unfortunate and unnecessary all this turmoil and strife is. How so much of this conflict could be avoided if people just made a greater effort to connect and understand each other. To see and know each other as interwoven strands in the tapestry of the universe. If only our souls were not so burdened with all the baggage of life, all our thoughtless, self-centered, callous indifference, all our greed and hatred and envy and fear. If we were not weighed down by the gravity of earthly things, we could know peace, could know kindness and fellowship, could know enlightenment and love. Sadly, this reality is a far way off for the UC timeline. The 1-year war leads to Operation Stardust in 0083, and 4 years after that comes the Grips conflict, which leads immediately into the next year's battle with Neo Zeon, and 5 years after is Char's counterattack. Then after another 3 years, we have the events of Gundam Unicorn. And then we get a break of 9 years before we see the Mafty Rebellion. And then 18 years after is the battle with Cosmo Babylonia. And then 10 years after that is the Crossbone Gundam manga that hasn't yet gotten animated. And then a full 2 decades pass before we see the rise of the Zanskare Empire. And then there's still yet more Gundam shit happening 70 years after in 0223 if we count G-Savior as canon. And of course, with Gundam still being a financially successful franchise, we can count on many, many more returns to the Universal Century to fill in all those little gaps. That is, if Sunrise can pull themselves away from the 1-year war. I don't know, between the original, War in the Pocket, Thunderbolt, 8th MS Team, Igloo, Kukuru's Doan's Island, and the latest, Requiem for Vengeance, I don't know if we really have a good view of what that conflict was like. Probably better do 100 more stories set during the 1-year war instead of coming up with some other conflict in a different time period or doing another critically acclaimed alternate continuity Gundam story. Good thinking, Sunrise! I think the Gundam itself, as the genre's first real robot, is kind of emblematic of this theme of how tantalizingly close but perpetually out of reach mankind is to peace, and here's where those notes you took in our Mazinger video are going to come in handy. Gundam and its themes and ideas, both in narrative and in world building, would be a stark contrast to the previous super robots, and this would help to differentiate them from the real robots. While the super robots were romanticized ideals of technological progress and invention, real robots were more cynical in their sci-fi themes, pointing out that it's not enough for science and industry to advance on its own. It's entirely possible for society to develop a greater mastery of technology while not advancing their own humanity. So much of technology is often the product of trying to get one over on an adversary rather than of purely egalitarian purpose. Even if the technology itself isn't intended for use in making someone else dead, its development so often only gets funded and accelerated in respect to how it can be used to give one party an advantage over their enemies in times of warfare. We mentioned this last episode with nuclear energy, but even things like bug spray, EpiPens, microwave ovens, duct tape, GPS, and superglue were all originally developed for use in assisting one group of soldiers in beating another group of soldiers. As the saying goes, the winners write the history books. Or conversely, it says here in this history book that luckily the good guys won every single time. Now how about that? So, with that in mind, enter Robert Heinlein. Heinlein was a prolific sci-fi author with a background in aeronautical engineering via the Navy, and I do mean prolific. The man's work has been celebrated as an equal to Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. 4 of his novels have won Hugo Awards, and he earned the title of the very first science fiction writer's Grand Master in 1974. But it's his 1959 novel, Starship Troopers, that is of special interest to our discussion today, as it had been translated to 11 different languages by 1980, and it's been directly cited as being a major influence on the original Gundam series. So obviously, I had to give it a look-see. Yeah, how do you like that? I chose this book to read over Tomino's own novel. That's what sets me apart from your average mecha anituber. It's brilliant insights like reading the highly popular world-famous book that inspired your favorite TV show instead of the non-canonical book adaptation of the TV show. Big brain move, everybody get on my level. I hadn't read Starship Troopers prior to working on this episode's script, or indeed any of Heinlein's other works, though I had watched the Paul Verhoeven film very loosely based on the book that satirizes the novel's themes. If you're unfamiliar, Starship Troopers basically invented the concept of galactic warfare, particularly the concept of the Space Marine, meaning that everything from Star Wars to Halo to Warhammer 40k to Ender's Game to Aliens, Doom, Gears of War, Quake, Unreal Tournament, James Cameron's Avatar, StarCraft, Helldivers, and Exosquad owe this novel a debt of gratitude. Starship Troopers concerns the exploits of Juan Rico, aka Johnny, as he enlists for military service and is enrolled in the Mobile Infantry, just in time for the Terran Federation to declare war on the hive-mind arachnids of planet Klendafu. As part of the Mobile Infantry, Rico is equipped with a state-of-the-art suit of power armor with top-of-the-line weaponry, and he and the other members of his platoon, Rasazik's Roughnecks, are periodically deployed for raids on planets controlled by their bug adversaries. By novel's end, he's been promoted to second lieutenant as the war rages on. And yeah, that's about it as far as the plot is concerned. I know that sounds like nothing compared to the, I assure you, very brief plot synopsis of Gundam's Universal Century I provided earlier, but Starship Troopers doesn't really have a conventional plot. Most of the novel is spent either describing the training the MI troops undergo or experiencing lectures in a civics class. Nor does Troopers have much in the way of actual characters with big personalities or driving motivations. Johnny Rico is honestly just a dipshit who basically gets peer pressured into every major decision he makes, and none of the rest of the cast are much to write home about either, if you can even remember them from chapter to chapter, as the book itself seems quick to forget most of them. They're all living their own little isolated narratives independent from each other, only briefly making cameos in each other's lives. So, how could this single novel inspire this huge multi-generational anime epic? Well, what Troopers lacks in engaging narrative, it makes up for in world building and theming. Johnny Rico is just a perspective by which we get a glimpse at the story's world and the ideas that construct it. And while I wouldn't consider Troopers to be a conventionally entertaining read, I did find it fascinating. I briefly considered doing a video about Troopers on its own rather than as part of Gundam. The novel received a 6-episode anime OVA series in 1988 that has yet to see official stateside release, but that means that there are kits on offer from Wave Corporation, the same company that produced my Scope Dog kit. However, they're all too bland and dull looking to justify dropping upwards of $50 USD on, and not quite in the same way I praised the Scope Dog for being. Further, while I say that Troopers is interesting, I should add that that does not mean I was eager to see what happened next in between each reading session, nor do I agree with the book's ideological assertions. Quite the opposite, in fact. The Terran Federation is a unified world government wherein race, creed, sex, and nationality are seemingly no longer divisive issues. Reportedly, it's an ideal society where crime and misanthropy are at an all-time low, but since we never really see outside of Johnny's perspective, and since he spends basically all of his time in military settings getting lectured at by a parade of square-jawed paternalistic veterans, none of whom have PTSD by the way, we only ever have the novel's word for that. While the Terran Federation is ostensibly a democracy, the only way for anyone to vote or to hold public office is to have completed a term of service in the military. Service guarantees citizenship, as the novel says. You cannot vote if you are still enlisted, nor can you vote if you have a dishonorable discharge, but a 2-year voluntary term, be that in the field or in one of these supporting sectors, or a 20-year voluntary career, both of which Johnny chooses upon the strong recommendation of someone else close to him, is all that is required to gain citizenship. Or if you get honorably discharged after getting your legs blown off, you can then vote as a consolation. Sorry about your legs. The thinking behind this is summarized in the line, "The noblest fate that a man can endure is to place his own mortal body between his loved home and war's desolation." The theory being that those who willingly submit themselves to serving and defending humankind, all at great personal strain and great personal risk, would be best suited to making decisions to benefit their fellow men. Surely if you're willing to sacrifice, then they presume you're capable of thinking big picture and caring about what happens to people who aren't you. It's the whole strong men create good times idea. And both a 2-year term and a 20-year term involve long, grueling training processes purposely designed to make it very easy and very appealing to resign early. Sorry, did I say training? While I suppose that's technically accurate, you could also assert that it's something closer to grooming. A heavy portion of the book is spent on Rico in the future equivalent of social studies class, here called History and Moral Philosophy. Moral philosophy is something that the book posits can be mathematically calculated and objectively measured, hence why it has a standardized curriculum that can be taught by military vets. Here again we cite these sayings about history books and the people who write them. Lieutenant Colonel Dubois, who teaches Rico's high school H&MP class, cites a lack of corporal punishment at early ages of childhood development as the source of rampant crime in their history's past, or our present day. Basically stating that parents weren't spanking their kids enough, and the class take it as read that what the man is saying is actually the root cause for antisocial behavior, instead of the sort of dipshit thing your crotchety uncle says when a teenager prefers to engage with their video game, rather than an out-of-touch 50-something know-it-all whose idea of a good time is Dean Koontz novels and listening to Glenn Beck. Upon changing from a 2-year term to a 20-year, Rico is assigned yet more training, which includes another semester of H&MP, as well as hypnosis and subliminal teaching while he sleeps. It calls to mind the Spartan Agoge I mentioned in my Scope Dog video, though thankfully with less child rape. The world outside Rico's training is never shown or elaborated on, we just have to take the book at its word that it all works as well as it says it does. Rico comes from a wealthy family, so he's never really wanted for much, nor has seemingly anyone he knows. Only one named human character is shown to ever have any antisocial tendencies in the book, a violent criminal who is swiftly executed, but the circumstances of their story is never expounded upon. We're just told that he murdered a child. There's a handful of toughs who get into a scuffle with Rico and his peers in the bar, but why is never really explained, and they are immediately remanded to the police right after. But all of his fellow cadets and officers are told to be morally righteous citizens, though none of them ever get fleshed out in any great detail. Even the one cadet who gets frustrated and strikes an officer, we are told but not shown, is actually a fine fellow. He's punished and expelled from service, but not because he lashed out. They explain that they want their trainees to be hungry for a fight. No, they punish him because he wasn't supposed to be able to actually land a hit on an officer, and the officers are covering that discrepancy up because it reflects poorly on them. There's no room for error or fallibility in this world, so any such failing must be swiftly and severely dealt with to ensure it never happen again. Even the hows and whys of the war are never fleshed out. An attack from a Clendathan advance invasion force occurs in Buenos Aires, but none of the characters even see it, though apparently Rico's mother is one of the casualties, so who even knows how that played out? Rico just states that the war kinda started up suddenly, to which he narrates something to the effect of, "Ours is not to wonder why, ours is but to fight and die." And MI doesn't ask questions, and MI just fights. No time for curiosity, stay on the bounce, soldier. We only ever have the Terran Federation's word for it that the bugs are an existential threat, and not, say, an inconvenient nuisance encountered in pursuit of Terran colonization of the universe. Rico briefly visits a human colony on another planet, and notes that due to the difference in environment, evolution will have an entirely different outcome for these people, and that they might one day in the far future become an enemy of Earth as a result, not unlike the bugs. And while we're assured that all of these characters are important to Rico, his fellow MIs whom he trusts with his life, his family whom he loves, his friends Carl and Carmencita who enlisted with him on the same day as he never seems to express much affection for them or remorse at their loss. Every time he has a conversation with anyone in the book, I have to check and see if this character had been mentioned before, and most of the time they haven't and don't show up again. About the closest to any other noteworthy characters whom Rico does seem to show strong feelings about and who do get something of a semblance of a fleshing out are his father, Lieutenant Colonel Dubois, Sergeant Charles Zim, and the various COs throughout his training. And the best we see of them is gruff but fair authority figures. Not even Carmencita, whom Rico has a crush on, has much revealed about her. Just that she's pretty and smart and pursues a career in the Terran Federation Navy, and that Rico fancies her because she's pretty and smart. The book's not going to describe how she's pretty or smart, just trust that she is. Several cadets die in training and no one bats an eye, it's just the cost of doing business. It's hard to tell how intentional Heinlein is being in keeping the reader in the dark vis-a-vis these details. On the one hand, he seems very meticulous and detailed and deliberate in his writing. You don't become a science fiction writer's grand master by being a lucky idiot. But on the other hand, he would in real life defend this vision of society and advocate for strong ruling authority and governance, which suggests this cold, impersonal worldview is something he admired. The enemy hardly merits a mention either. There's two factions, a species referred to only as the Skinnies and another as the Bugs, but neither are ever explained in any great detail, not even a description of appearance. I don't think they ever even get referred to as Clendothans. They have no identity. They're just skittering vermin with ugly chitinous exoskeletons we're not meant to think too hard about. They are evidently intelligent enough to master space travel. They are telepathically directed from afar by special brain bugs who operate most of the swarm as puppets, but nothing more is really explained about them or their society. The Skinnies are enemies of the Terran Federation at first, and the opening chapter sees the Roughnecks wrecking up their shit, but then at some point they switch sides off screen and ally against the Bugs, again, so we are told but never see. Until the penultimate chapter, no attempt is made to understand the Bugs beyond figuring out which ones are the worker caste and which ones are the soldier caste, and therefore which one is most worth expending ammo on. A big deal is made about how the Bugs are part of a hive mind and how they hatch in the hundreds of thousands daily, ready to fight straight off, whereas a human needs months in order to be trained. And it almost seems to suggest that the concept of human free will is a hindrance to us as a species, because humanity is supposedly losing the war. Boy, wouldn't it be great if we could just send children fresh out of the womb straight onto the battlefield, ready to go? If only we could breed faster than them, we'd have enough cannon fodder to show those nasty Bugs what for. The Bugs are just a faceless, amorphous legion of relentless, impending enemies who most assuredly want us dead, and frankly, that's about the same as the human characters we're meant to sympathize with. So it's us or them. You have a duty to your species, to your colony, to follow orders and destroy the enemy. Once again, the noblest fate that a man can endure is to place his own mortal body between his loved home and war's desolation, which seems to suggest that war is an inevitability, rather than an unfortunate and all too frequent failing of our species, that we are incapable of forming friendships with others different than us, and it is only through war that one can prove themselves. Service guarantees citizenship. A lot of literary debate has come out of this book, some citing it as outright fascism and glorification of militarism, and this wasn't helped by the book being released when the Vietnam War was in full swing. Still others claimed it to be more libertarian and fatalistic about its views on war. After all, enlistment is voluntary, and I suppose if you want to be an ass about it, you could argue that the free market is choosing only the best candidates to participate in both warfare and democracy. But surely, even in our world, you can see evidence of how short-sighted this thinking is. Despite what US propaganda will have you believe, not all members of the armed forces are stalwart, noble, selfless individuals of upstanding character. They call them jarheads for a reason. They're meant to be empty vessels so that their COs can fill them up with the info they want them to have, and only that. They want wide-eyed, impressionable teenagers on the cusp of adulthood for a reason. Someone older or more savvy might ask a few too many questions and undermine your operation. And further, the assumption that they all do so for noble reasons is also unrealistic. Rico didn't sign up initially because he believed in the cause. There was seemingly no war at the time of his enlistment, and he states he wouldn't have enlisted if they had been at war. He just wanted to get a cozy military desk job so he could vote afterwards, and he just didn't have the aptitude for anything other than getting shot at. Surely some people in real life do want to defend God and country, but it could also be that they might be enlisting to pay for college that they couldn't afford otherwise and are hoping to simply make enough money to lift themselves and their families out of poverty. War is a job, and like any job, most of the people aren't punching in because they believe in the company. They're doing it because something is held over their heads and withheld until they do something to enrich the company. Unless you're still laboring under the delusion that we really were defending life and liberty in the Iraq War. Or worse still, perhaps the idea of shooting people consequence-free appeals to the prospective enlistee. The real-life US military collaborates with Hollywood in the Call of Duty video game series for this very reason, to make war look really cool and fun. Oh, you're making an Iron Man film? Well, we'll let you use all our real planes and guns and shit for filming, so long as you make the US Armed Forces look badass. Recruitment in the Navy saw an 8% bump back in 1986 after the release of Top Gun. Hey, quick question. When was the last time the US was actually defending anything, and not just kicking around other countries for the sake of protecting their stock portfolio? World War II, maybe? I'm genuinely not sure. Additionally, it occurs to me that if, hypothetically of course, militarism and the military are the sole source of governance in the world, as is the case in Troopers, if you've based your society around the notion that only strong men who have proved themselves in the fires of war are worthy of ruling or deciding the course of humanity, then that kind of necessitates the need for there to always be an armed conflict to validate that. I mean, think about it. If your rulers are just anyone who passes through basic and then just spends 2 years on reserve duty, people who never see the elephant, well, shucks, that sure does kneecap that supposed worthiness of that person, huh? And if there are all these people who do their 2-year term, no sweat, and you aren't seeing like 80% of them getting ground up by alien bug monsters, then suddenly there's that many more people who can get involved and maybe reassess how the system works or oust old leadership. Not every soldier is going to be as unquestioningly dim as Johnny Rico. And if so much of your taxes are going to a bunch of military hardware that just collects dust in a hangar, maybe that military budget starts drying up. And maybe that cuts into the salaries of all those high-ranking officials. Maybe it then behooves you to start flying around the galaxy looking for cosmic hornets' nests to throw rocks at. War always needs an enemy. So those who benefit from wars happening always need to find an enemy, whether one previously existed or not. Who am I voting for? Well, we're at war. You can't inaugurate a new commander-in-chief while mankind is existentially threatened. The new guy would need to be brought up to speed on so much stuff, and that could get us all killed. You don't change horses midstream. That's why I want to re-elect War Master Palpatine and Vice Admiral Saruman. Fortunately, it's not military men who get elected in the real world, it's just a bunch of people who are constantly rubbing elbows with arms dealers and a president who gets elevated to commander-in-chief in our military. With this mindset, other beings aren't perceived as people, they're just obstacles. Think back to the history of Japan leading up to World War II that we discussed last episode. Suppose that sort of thing might have been a familiar sentiment in, say, the Meiji era? If you've been paying attention, you'll be unsurprised to learn that it definitely was. The Imperial Japanese Army was very busy during this time, annexing Taiwan and Korea during Mutsuhito's reign. And while they allied with the Entente during World War I under Emperor Taisho, they used this as an opportunity to expand their control into Chinese territories, which Hirohito would ramp up even further in the subsequent Showa era. A more comprehensive history of Japan under the Meiji Constitution would take too long, but we can summarize the sentiments of the Imperial Japanese Army with the Nanjing Massacre of 1937 and the Sukching of 1942, key events of the Second Sino-Japanese War which occurred concurrently with World War II. While all these different ethnicities would fall under the blanket term of Asians to undereducated white Americans such as myself, the Japanese viewed these other groups as subhuman, which made their atrocities so much easier to commit. The Sukching, for example, was an effort to purge Singapore of anti-Japanese sentiments, but the Japanese soldiers didn't bother to discriminate which of the locals harbored such sentiments, and indiscriminately murdered 40 to 50,000 Singaporean and Malaysian Chinese citizens, and forced 90,000 more to work themselves to literal death constructing the Siam-Burma Railway, though this pales in comparison to the Nanjing Massacre 5 years prior, or to give it its other name, the Rape of Nanjing, where the Japanese Imperial Army captured China's capital of Nanjing while ruthlessly slaughtering 200,000 non-combatants and POWs and raping 20,000 women and children. Senseless brutality of this magnitude is only possible if you don't see your foes as equally deserving of life as yourself. After all, you wouldn't concern yourself with the individual opinions ants have for humans when you wipe out a colony of them hiding in your kitchen pantry, would you? And to Japanese soldiers, anyone ethnically Chinese or Thai or Burmese or whatever were no better than insects. Again, this seems incomprehensible to us Americans who conceptualize racism as white Klansmen who hate the more racially distinct groups such as Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latino, or Jewish folks. But get on social media to ask your average member of the UK's Tory party their opinions on their French, Welsh, Irish, Scottish, German, Czech, Spanish, Polish, or Italian neighbors, and you'll discover an entire symphony of the night upside-down Dracula castle of new flavors of irrational bigotries. And it was precisely this kind of attitude that made Hitler declare the Japanese to be honorary Aryans. The bugs are keeping us, the strong men, from what we so rightfully deserve to have by virtue of our strength, so they must be dealt with. The only good bug is a dead bug. When you think like a hammer, all your problems start to look like nails. And conversely, it paints a rather pessimistic and hostile view of your fellow countrymen. People are just dumb animals who need to be told what to do by a strong leader. How do you get strong? Glad you asked. Please sign up for a heavy indoctrination course followed by a series of suicide missions. What? I did it and I turned out just fine. Why should I take anything you say seriously until you do the same? All your complaints are just frivolous nonsense. You haven't done or experienced anything as hard as I have. Shut your spoiled ass up. You only have the ability to whine like you do because of people like me. You know, this was an election year, and I don't know about you, but I kept seeing an awful lot of ads hyping up the threat of scary illegal immigrants and the strong men who will put a stop to their reign of terror. Yeah, I haven't forgotten that this is still a Gundam video, and that the inclusion of Starship Troopers is only to explain the thinking behind Gundam. The villains in all the mecha shows leading up to Gundam had been avaricious tyrants bent on conquest for personal enrichment, often at the expense of their people. But it was Gundam that most highlighted that in real life these enemies weren't cackling supervillains from alien races, they were ordinary mundane political leaders and financiers who are just doing what those in such positions are supposed to do: secure ever more power and wealth. Or to call back to last episode, monsters in fiction are rarely just monsters, they're meant to represent something. Functionally, a mad scientist on a quest to conquer the world with an army of Kakaiju isn't any different than a world leader or business person whose status leads them to disassociate from all those less powerful than them. They just go about their world conquering in different ways, the latter being lawful evil, while the former is chaotic evil. For all its many flaws, Gundam is a very human piece of fiction, while Starship Troopers is anything but. Troopers' mobile infantry suits are described as looking like big metal gorillas, and the commanding officers frequently refer to MI Troopers as apes. They're a key part of the theming of both Troopers and Gundam. In the first chapter, the Roughnecks are told that they had better return to the dropship because their suits are very expensive, and the Terran Federation has a lot invested in this military hardware. Whether the man inside has splattered all the bits doesn't matter a whit, they can always put another man inside that exoskeleton. The biggest pain being the time cost in training that man. Rico is commended for his performance in the first chapter's mission because he successfully retrieves the body of a fallen comrade, and therefore the suit he's wearing. The troopers are referred to as mobile infantry because the suit's jets and strength-enhancing capabilities are meant to allow the troopers to swiftly jump great distances, enabling them to bound across the battlefield to more effectively hit objectives, all while carrying a heavy arsenal on their backs of ammunition that they are expected to expend before missions end. And the men inside need to be highly trained and disciplined so that the suit has more time to do its thing, more time to blow shit up, and is more likely to return so it can do it all again. The more damage it does, the more return on initial investment, because if war's a job, it's also a business. Now, why use a mech at all for such a grounded, realistic war story? As the joke in sci-fi warfare circles goes, mechs are just tanks that are capable of tripping. Why not simply make a story about space tanks and space planes? Well, you'll recall from my previous episode that in the Super Robot shows and the precursor robot anime that predate Mazinger, the robots are representative of a triumph of humanity over the traumas of the war. Technology is only as evil as those who wield it. Science, reason, and industry will see us through to our future. Behold the merger of man and science, the man of the future, a man of iron! And of course, in the super robots we see not just science, but super science. Here is the pinnacle of man's achievement. He is capable of performing miracles that will see him through his darkest hours. Our human spirit will not be crushed by the challenges we face. We will grow from them and overcome them. Even the limitations of current known science will one day be surpassed by man's ingenuity. And certainly, mobile infantry and mobile suits and other real robot mecha are technological wonders to us, the audience. But they're not really treated as such in universe, just like how nobody's still shitting themselves in amazement over the concept of automobiles. So I'll pose a couple theories, the first perhaps a little more whimsical, the other I think the more likely intention that Tomino took influence from in reading Heinlein. Eastern and Western philosophies regarding arms tend to differ rather drastically. A Western philosophy sees weapons as an accessibility to force. Anyone can pick up a gun or a sword and be the equal of another in terms of capacity for harm. Perhaps this is where the romanticization of the Second Amendment or Karl Marx's advocacy for an armed proletariat come in. A gun permits the wielder to throw off their chains of oppression as it makes him the equal to his masters. Whereas an Eastern philosophy sees weapons as a martial discipline. One's capacity for force is determined by their skill in making the weapon an extension of the self. Any dullard might pick up a blade or a gun, but only a master will be able to make full use of it. The weapon is merely the focal point of the will. And without that mastery, you're just some idiot running off to get killed by someone who is a master of their chosen tool. Perhaps then the mecha is a sort of middle point of the two philosophies. In my Mazinger video, I talked about how henshin heroes started a trend in Japanese media of protagonists who don't merely have secret identities, but who transform in order to do battle. And you could draw parallels to a mecha suit. Mazinger is synonymous with Koji Kabuto and vice versa. A mecha is both transformative and empowering, but also an extension of the self, quite literally being a set of stilts, a suit of armor, some extendo arms, and a weapon, all rolled into one unit. Some series take this a little more literally than others. Hiroshi Shiba doesn't merely pilot Jeeg, he transforms into Jeeg's head and combines with the Jeeg parts to become the heroic robot. Gai Shishio does something similar with Gao Gaigar, combining his own cyborg body with the robot lion Galleon and the Gao machine vehicles. The pilot or pilots become something greater than themselves by stepping into the cockpit, but also it is their particular mastery over it or some intrinsic quality of theirs that makes them most suited to piloting. Professor Saotome chooses his getter pilots for their incredible human tenacity. A psychic is needed to pilot Gai King, and Sanshiro Suwabuki is the only one left after the Zellans murder all the rest. You need to be a very special someone to make the robot work. But this is not the case with the real robot. The idea is that the mechs are mass-produced military hardware not dissimilar from tanks or fighter planes. The super robots are a lot closer to superheroes. They're unique, specially made by some singular visionary scientist for the sake of fighting against a great evil that cannot be defeated by mere military arms, and their battles are often framed as epic duels between titans who stand opposite each other, calling forth all their might to overcome their opponents, busting out all their super moves to demonstrate just how powerful they are. Presto fire! Chodenji Tatsumaki! Geta Tomahawk! Giga Drill Break! But the mobile suits in Gundam are meant to swiftly traverse the battlefield, cutting down multiple foes at a time, lest they be one of the casualties of war. And the fact that they're mass-produced means that it could be anyone in any of the mobile suits out there. Sure, there's lots of ace pilots, and we get to know a lot of the people who regularly hop into the cockpits, but the war needs bodies. I don't know if you heard, but 50% of mankind has died already so far. The Earth Federation needs you to pilot a mobile suit in service to peace and democracy. You always know who's inside Deimos or Grendizer piloting it, but a Zaku or a GM could have anyone piloting it. Even the Gundam, particularly powerful in-universe though it is just one of many Gundams flying around in the war. To reference my Scope Dog video again, the mech design philosophy behind the Scope Dogs is a reflection of what Gundam was trying to emulate, particularly with the Zeon suits that all feature more hunched designs and singular tunnel vision eyes reminiscent of the German Wehrmacht. They're meant to be viewed as uniformed soldiers, as helmets and gas masks and backpacks and rifles marching in lockstep. It strips the pilot of identity rather than enhancing their identity like the Super Robot does. Unlike with Super Robots, mobile suits with something more closely resembling actual faces are few and far between, and the name Gundam is stated to be a portmanteau of the word gun and the word dam, the vision being of a singular warrior who holds off floods of enemies on his own like a dam does a river. Here we are called upon to envision just crashing waves of faceless antagonists like so many drops of water. I also think it's interesting to note that prior to Gundam, mechs that use actual firearms are remarkably uncommon. Projectile attacks like beams or missiles, sure, but they're usually built into the robot. The one exception that comes to mind, though I grant I could be forgetting one, is Zambo Ace from Zambot 3, which was another Tomino work. The history of war and its associated technology is a long and storied one, and it all starts with man fighting man. Somewhere along the way, it evolves into man fighting man with stick, or man fighting man with rock. Some means of one party gaining an advantage over the other in order to more effectively secure victory. But once one side adopts a strategy, the other must too, so as not to lose the advantage, and then again the opponents must find something new that gives him the advantage over the other man. So stick and rock get traded for knife or sword or club, better designed for holding and for inflicting more grievous harm with less effort. And soon follows other tools that give advantage. Spears to put distance between the attacker and the attacked, shields to block damage from attack, and throw in horses, and that's improved mobility and height. But for most of man's history, there was no getting around two bodies that need to meet on the battlefield and clash in person, having to look the enemy in the eye, even if only briefly, and reckon with a foe you give face to. Infantry was the backbone of war, and while there were tools that could give one advantage, any person, prince or pauper, could be infantry or cavalry. Anyone could pick up a sword and be a threat. From there, we developed the longbow into guns and gunpowder to do even more damage from greater distance with less effort and skill. Anyone can pick up a gun and be a threat. A sword requires more skill and closer proximity. Well, wouldn't you know, guns can be added to vehicles. Ships. A ship can't wield a sword, arrows don't work against ships, but ships can be equipped with cannons. A ship is both a castle and a siege engine. It's much harder for a man to own a ship on his own, much less operate on his own, not to mention it can only do battle at sea or with the coast. A ship is more likely owned by the state or a wealthy financier, and is used in service of such, maybe to put down those rebellious upstarts who can't afford a ship of their own, but resent those who do. So likely, those with ships go unchallenged by anyone but those forces whom also own ships, other nations or wealthy interests. And it's much less messy, too. No need to get blood on your nice uniform. No need to step over corpses. Just point at something far away and it blows the hell up, and you can sail on to the next target. And with the inevitable invention of tanks and planes, we solved the problem of only being usable from the water. So soon having a navy is no longer sufficient for doing battle. And from there, it's ever upward, always a new toy that needs developed, always a new way to challenge adversaries for supremacy. Mobile suits, therefore, could be seen as technology advancing so much so that it comes full circle back to the messy affair of man fighting against man in person on the battlefield. But it's a twisted version of humanity made of metal, and it no longer need involve staring an actual human being in the face. Meanwhile, futuristic versions of great battleships and fighter planes and tanks are slowly becoming obsolete as you need so many people to man them, and they aren't as quick or maneuverable as mobile suits who can fly circles around the ship, cramming potatoes in the exhaust pipe and dragging their keyrings across the finish before finally delivering a well-placed shot on the fuel tank. And while mobile suits come equipped with standard close combat weapons such as heat hawks and beam sabers, firearms remain the standard. So no worries if you failed fencing. Here's a bazooka, just point and something somewhere is bound to blow up far away from you. Even with weapons, it's hard to kill someone. Like you are evolutionarily predisposed to not want to. We know this has to be true because if humans' fear and distrust of one another was stronger than their instinct to cooperate, we never would have formed clans, tribes, villages, societies. And in a healthy society, you should be conditioned into a strong sense of empathy. Hurting another person should be something that you feel conflicted about, both before and after you do so. Being brought to the point where you can purposely hurt or wish harm on another being often requires strong negative emotions. Anger, sadness, fear, distrust, trauma, pain, hatred. It's very hard to get along with anyone who harms others with little to no effort because they've got all of that just frothing around inside them and spilling out everywhere. Even if you only want to wound someone as an expression of your misery, or even in cases of self-defense, wanting them dead requires an extreme state of mind. And it's supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be hard to kill. Humans are communal animals. We have better chances of surviving and thriving in groups, working in tandem, building a society. That's what these developed brains are supposed to be for, giving us the best chance to live long, happy lives. If it's too easy to kill each other when we get slightly narked off, that hurts our chances for survival. Being apathetic to seeing another being in pain is just not something that comes naturally. Watching someone get hurt causes us to wince or turn away. Watching a baby animal nuzzle and mourn a dead parent stings, even though we aren't the same species, and it's even harder if we recognize the victim. That's not just any old dead animal, that's Bambi's mom. That's Old Yeller. That's Littlefoot's mom. That's Artax, Atreu's horse. Don't sink into the swamp of sadness, Artax! No! Artax! It doesn't even have to be direct physical pain. Even just mundane shit that sucks even harder if you know who the recipient of that bad news is and know what their life is like. If I told you, oh, Stuart got fired today, he wasn't performing up to expected standards, do you care? Who's Stuart? He's just someone at work. Whatever. No big deal. Sucks for Stuart. But if you hear this exchange, bad news, we're gonna have to fire Charlie when he comes in. He's just not performing up to expected standards. Oh man, are you serious? He was just telling me how he's behind on his rent and how his girlfriend has his baby on the way. Jeez, when does he work next? Well, he's off today because his mom just died and he's at the funeral. Guess the GoFundMe that he set up for cancer treatments can maybe go to paying for the grave plot. Although I hear they didn't get but like $200. Charlie's not even real, but all of his story that I just made up probably put a little bit of a sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. Every new detail another thing to wince at. Stuart's just Stuart. Without any more information, you just have to assume that Stuart deserved to get fired because he sucked. But I humanized Charlie. He has a whole fucking backstory now, and even if he wasn't good at his job, you're probably imagining the hurt on his face when he gets the news about being terminated. A face that if you saw it, even if you didn't know what happened, your heart might ache a little. Hell, maybe all of that lore I made up is why Charlie isn't performing his job correctly. You don't even know that Stuart's life is somehow even sadder than Charlie's, but you just shrugged at the idea that maybe he's getting evicted now too. Do you think that if you saw Charlie on the opposite side of the battlefield, knowing that he signed up with the army to get out of medical debt and send money home to the woman carrying his baby, that you'd be able to just shoot him if you had to? Maybe, but maybe not. What if Charlie's one of a squad of 100 soldiers, and all of them are covered head to toe in giant metal exoskeleton body armor, so you can't tell who's who? What if there's an entire army of those same soldiers, and that by pressing a button from 1,000 miles away, you can launch a missile at that army? Or that by giving an order from 1,000 miles away, you can send in a bunch of your own giant robot body armor soldiers to fight that army. Suddenly, the odds of you killing Charlie just went up. You can do it by accident and not even know or care. You've dehumanized him. Charlie is unpersoned now. All there is now is just a big number of enemies. Just a nameless, faceless horde. Hey, all the soldiers under your command have backstories too. Did you consider that before you gave the order for them to go to war? Is this war worth all the misery and suffering that will occur as a result? Or would you rather not think about that? Then just don't do that. There are numbers, lots of numbers, far away in the distance, indistinguishable from one another. Hitting one of them's as good as hitting any. Just stay nice and safe in your isolated battle armor, cut off from the hostile world outside. Point and shoot. There, that's much better. Just like a video game now. You've played Space Invaders, right? Try for a high score. Shoot the mothership for bonus points. It's worth so much because there's so many enemies riding inside. Pew pew pew! Kablamo! That's why reducing someone's identity down to nothing more than just an object, a number, a statistic is such a common and grim practice. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying in armed conflicts every day, all around the world. Billions of people get their war labor exploited for profit by their war employers every day, all around the world. Who cares? What's for dinner? But if I show you a picture of a bunch of hungry orphans, of women crying over corpses, of men falling to their knees as they look at the devastation of their homes, suddenly you're upset. When you see people all around you struggling to afford the very goods that they themselves produce, the goods that make their company billions in profit, suddenly you become frustrated. What is causing so much hurt? Who are the people responsible for this? Why is such suffering allowed to happen? And depending on the answer you get, your anger can get directed in many different ways. Is it the fault of a particular race of people? A particular country? Certain parties within that country? A few key individuals? Or is it all the result of a system that incentivizes making real-life human beings small enough that you don't care what happens to them, so long as someone can gorge themselves to extremity on the spoils of that suffering? Here in the good old US of A, we like to pretend it happens elsewhere, in some far-off land where a bunch of brown people who we don't have to think about are the victims. Too bad they can't live here in the greatest country on earth, we like to say to ourselves, while also ignoring that there are people within our own borders who suffer similar injustices that we don't give a shit about until it affects us personally. Not that any of that should be acceptable, especially knowing it's usually our bombs or our guns killing those people. And then we look at the news day after day, and there's another mass shooting somewhere in the country. Not just gang violence, not just homicide, but people just losing it and lashing out at no one, lashing out at innocents. Co-workers, passers-by, school children. Did you know that gun sales actually get a little bit of a boost after major shooting incidents? People get scared. They know they can't count on the cops to do anything but show up too late and often shoot the wrong people or house pets. I wonder if that's got anything to do with gun control legislation being so slow in this country. Don't worry though, gun deaths in the US are down for the second year in a row according to some charts I looked at. Links in the description just in case you're feeling too good about your day. They're still 50% higher than they were 10 years ago, and only a few thousand down from the 2021 peak. This excludes suicides, by the way. But it's just a way of life now. Schools and businesses just have active shooter training as a standard. It's fine. New normal. You could be at peril at any time because our politicians are apparently powerless to do anything. I'm sure some of you out there have the same thoughts as me after another school shooting. How long before it's my kid? Anonymity, distance, ignorance, all these things permit the soldier to fight his enemy, to fight without ever knowing or humanizing his enemy, even if he stands opposite him in a duel of blades. All these things permit a general or head of state or other party to send thousands and millions of people off to war. They're all just blips on a radar. Bogeys on a view screen. Killing a blip or a bogey with no face or name is easy. You barely have to think about it. Barely have to reconcile what you're doing to another human being. They're just targets. You know, I pointed out that ships and tanks aren't usually owned by common men like one could own a rifle or saber. They're owned by countries. It also still seems unlikely that a single person can own and maintain a mobile suit all on their own, and indeed, mobile suits are property of the armies they belong to. The soldiers don't even own the means of their own warfare. It's on loan from and in service to someone richer than you. You can own a gun. You can steal a gun and maintain it. Clean it, load it, repair it, hide it under your bed if you need to. Do you think you could do that with an 18-meter tall giant robot? So good luck turning your mobile suits against those you serve for any meaningful length of time. How are you going to afford the fuel, transport, ammo, or repairs on your own? It's the countries to use, not the soldiers. The soldier just operates it at the behest of those who give the orders. Humanity is stripped out of warfare in these circumstances. It's just blips swatting blips in some great outer space game of chess. Ironic, given how many characters we come to know in Gundam, not just pilots and soldiers, but supporting crew and civilians on both sides. Real quick, apropos of nothing, let me just offer this friendly reminder from my Hygog video that the word robot is a Czech term meaning slave. In this case, a slave made only for war. A being who is made a slave to war. And how does our country actually treat those veterans we send off to get shot at and killed on our behalf? Not the citizens, mind, I mean the actual state that enlists them and ships them off, the powers that declare the wars that our soldiers fight. How does our state treat our veterans? Well, how many of them end up traumatized, broken, addicted, homeless, unable to safely coexist with their family members, their friends, their lovers, because they are all too scarred by the experience? How many of them end up on the street or in rehab because they're no longer capable of existing in civil society? Respect our troops doesn't just mean giving them a salute and comping their meal at Applebee's. It means housing them, healing them, and making sure their sacrifice isn't in vain, that the peace they fight for is a lasting one. It means making sure that future generations of young men and women don't have to keep making the same sacrifices again and again and again. But not only do our politicians consistently neglect those who make it home from war, but they constantly find new conflicts to get into, either directly or by providing support for ally nations that just cannot seem to get along with their neighbors. There's never enough blood to teach us our lessons, because none of that blood ever gets on the people who want it all spilled. You don't have to be a soldier to hold public office, or to work for Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or Northrop Grumman, which is good, because then you might feel bad about the cost of doing business in war, and then business dries up. You can't consistently get rich exploiting the labor of war if you view the people as people. Trying to convey this vision of mechs as cannon fodder killing machines was something of a struggle at the onset of Gundam, as the network and the toy manufacturers were still playing to the heroic robot tropes as part of their business. Tomino and his colleague Kunio Okawara really did their best to reconcile these two ideas, and I think that the results are really interesting. Even the best of super robots tend to have lots of little design flourishes that make them stand out, lots of bright colors and extra pointy bits that don't really serve any function but to look cool, not to mention a totally new, unique enemy every episode. Why does Voltus 5 have a big V on his chest? Why does Jeeg have those goofy ear fins? Why does Diapolon look like he's wearing a football helmet and shoulder pads? Why does Radine have all those horns? Why do so many of these robots have mouths and noses and eyeballs? Well, to be striking and stand out, of course, to give them identity. But again, the purpose in Gundam was to make more pragmatic mass-produced mechs. Jeeps and attack helicopters are all painted olive drab to serve as camouflage, and they definitely don't need hot rod flames or hood ornaments or spoilers or chrome-spinning rims. The original design for the Gundam was meant to be just plain gray and white, but the studio insisted on adding bright primary colors to highlight its status as the title machine. Despite their more limited use, the gun cannon and gun tank were added as disparate-looking machines to provide the Gundam with an entourage reflective of Getter Robo. And comparing the gun tank to Getter 3, I can kinda see that. But even those just get folded into later incarnations of the Gundam and the GM, which is the cheaper mass production model of the Gundam. And the signature V-fin and face shield with two eyes instead of a visor or scope are meant to evoke a samurai's kabuto helmet. The eyes are the window to the soul, as the saying goes. Hey, what happened to all those proud samurai after the Edo period when they're no longer needed in the Meiji regime? I'm sure it's nothing to Satsuma Rebellion about. Sorry, nothing to worry about. Anyways, the Gundam is akin to Captain America, and all the other suits are just American GIs or Nazi Wehrmacht. But if you strip away the coat of paint, the Gundam really is just a prettied up GM, an unglamorous utilitarian war machine. The facade of a hero in this story of grimy, brutal warfare really is just that paper thin. A superhero without his cape and costume, without his kindly smile and sly winking eye, without the grand mythological status and iconography. It's just the realization of the Übermenschen that the Nazis co-opted from Nietzsche. It's just the terrifying premise of an individual whose will is unbound by laws or morality or altruism. And the Gundam is, frankly speaking, just a few steps removed from a soulless killing machine shaped like a man, an automaton built for war and conquest. We can see this on display in Requiem for Vengeance, where the Gundam EX plays a role akin to a monster in a horror movie, merciless and unstoppable, pitiless and inhuman, a reaper dogging the characters at every turn. And that version looks almost skeletal in its design, just to really drive the point home. But I think Zeta's Psycho Gundam in particular, with its even more towering scale and far darker color scheme, is a perfect example of how little it takes to go from inspiring statuesque figure to horrifying monstrosity. And the way 4 Murasame, the pilot of said Psycho Gundam, is an artificially enhanced amnesiac who is compelled to do battle against her will, at the behest of the Titans, strung along by the false promise that she might regain her humanity, her identity, is a way of demonstrating just how dehumanizing the war effort really is. They'll even dehumanize their own child soldiers, further still if it will give them an advantage. For time and decency purposes, I omitted a discussion of Japan's Unit 731 here, one of a number of possible real-world events that may have inspired the Cyber New type subplot, but it really demonstrates just how much human souls are weighed down by gravity, both in Gundam and in our world. Google with caution. And all this dehumanization contrasts it against the super robot metaphor of the robots as a tool of empowerment, a vision of the future, a representation of having one's own atomic bomb. Tools are just tools, independent of morality. They can be used for good or for evil. With this machine, you can be like a god or a devil. Okay, well, atom bombs are still atom bombs, and atom bombs were made with the express purpose of mass destruction, of pushing a single button and ending tens or even hundreds of thousands of lives. What does it say of a society that builds such a thing? That makes such a thing so depressingly common? Can your robot really be considered such a grand hero in this light? When this is what you dedicate your time, your energy, your resources, your mighty human ingenuity to? Is this the pinnacle of human achievement then? A weapon that walks as a man! Men made into nothing more than bullets, fired at each other in some operatic spectacle of carnage that now spills out beyond even our planet into the humbling majesty of the galaxy. It's not enough to scar our world with blast radii and bomb fragments, with exhaust and chemical spillage and the blood of so many souls. You must now pollute space with your shell casings, where once bodies would be lost at sea or returned to the earth from whence they came. They are now piled up beyond the clouds and left drifting in the ether, making all of the heavens a graveyard. Not just for yourselves, but for your children too. For all those who come after you, you would continue to inflict this cruelty on your children. Is this your grand future? Your universal century of repeating the same mistakes made here on Earth? The most noble fate a man can endure is to place his own body between his loved home and the war's desolation. But does desolation manifest in a vacuum? Or is it manufactured by those who can never have enough? Is it cheerfully invited by those who know that they'll never have to meet that desolation themselves, so long as they have someone else's blood to trade for their own gain? Is peace even a consideration when the lives at stake are viewed as merely insects and vermin? Seems to me that we'll never escape that desolation so long as the bodies in the way are considered so cheap. It's ironic that in both Starship Troopers and Gundam, the war takes place beyond our Earth sphere. While not unheard of, this was uncommon in both sci-fi stories and in mecha anime up to this point. Sure, there were stories that involved space, involved invaders from another planet, War of the Worlds being an obvious example, and one could scarcely cough in any direction in the mecha genre without hacking spittle onto 3 different series that involved spacemen with designs on our world as some sort of settler colonial project. But stories about humans going to space and spending any great amount of time there, those were fewer and further between. Even stuff like John Carter of Mars, or Buck Rogers, or Flash Gordon scarcely mentioned spaceships. They could be seen more like Gulliver's Travels, just men in foreign lands, washed ashore in strange countries and made to come to terms with new customs and conflicts. And Gundam, meanwhile, was preceded by only a handful of titles that took place in the star-studded ocean between Earth and alien worlds. Zero Tester, Space Battleship Yamato, Galaxy Express 39, Captain Harlock, and as far as mecha was concerned, to my knowledge, only Vanguard Ace, Space Knight Tekkaman, and Uchumazen Daikengo predate Gundam in taking giant piloted robots out to play among the stars. Outer space was merely the commute for Martians to come visit us. In 1949, the Soviet Union had successfully tested their first nuclear weapon, which would deepen the tensions between the USA and the USSR. Though allies in World War II, the two powers saw each other as ideological opposites. Rather than engage in direct conflict, they hoped to develop their country's technologies and engage in proxy geopolitical conflicts so that they could defeat the other with superior potential might, by being so overwhelmingly large and imposing that the other would not dare to challenge them. Today we know this as the Cold War. The US being the first and for a time only country on Earth that had access to nuclear weapons made it a terrifying threat to all the rest of the world, and the Soviet Union sought to meet and equal that threat so that the US could not run roughshod across the globe. But not unlike the factions in Gundam, neither side can really claim the moral high ground in the next several decades of feuding in espionage and proxy wars and Cuban Missile crises. Millions died as a result of their rivalry. Many of them neither NATO nor Soviet citizens, just millions and millions of souls from Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Cuba, Germany, China, Hungary, France, Czechoslovakia, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Poland, and others, all caught up in the dick measuring of giants. Rarely did they directly do battle, there were so many others who could do the fighting on their behalf. And as these titans and their frost battle raged, the world held its breath. With equal mastery of the atom acquired back in 1949, both powers set their sights beyond our world to the stars. Space is not just the final frontier, but the ultimate high ground. Being able to go to and from space while your enemy could not would be a potentially massive advantage. The Soviets successfully launched the first satellite, Sputnik 1, on October 4th, 1957, and it would follow that up with the first orbital flight of an astronaut, Yuri Gagarin, aboard Vostok 1 on April 12, 1961. Russia pulled ahead. But in July 1969, America launched the Apollo 11, which over the course of 8 days, from the 16th to the 24th, brought astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin to the surface of the moon, and then returned them back to Earth. April 1972 saw America and the Soviet Union set aside their differences to plan a joint international space mission known as Apollo-Soyuz, which was carried out successfully in July 1975. For a brief moment, these two fearsome competitors, these two bitter rivals, set aside their differences to go beyond our world and make advancements for all mankind. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the US and Russia would again collaborate on space missions in 1993. Though, I can't imagine those collaborations are still ongoing, particularly with Russia and America up to old tricks again, most recently here with Ukraine. Alright, now let's turn back the clock just a smidge. April 16th, 1953. With the Korean War in a deadlock and 2 to 3 million dead as a result, and with Soviet leader Joseph Stalin having perished a month prior from cerebral hemorrhage, freshly inaugurated President Dwight Eisenhower would give his famous Chance for Peace speech. Many hoped Eisenhower would take advantage of the temporary vacuum of power in the USSR and push for increased pressure on the Soviets, and with it, increased military spending. However, President Eisenhower had the following to say. I present a brief excerpt from his Chance for Peace speech. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete pavement. We pay for a single fighter with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. Eisenhower would echo these sentiments in his farewell address in 1961. As you've heard me mention in previous videos, the US currently leads the world in annual military spending with a budget that exceeds the sum total of the next 10 highest spending countries combined. Guess they didn't listen. I feel like that's the fitting epithet for Gundam. A cross of iron. Humanity forever bound, hand and foot and heart, to the thing that torments it, the thing that forever keeps it stuck to Earth's gravity. Men made of metal rather than of flesh and blood, locked in forever warfare. How much money do you suppose a mobile suit costs to build and maintain? And there are fleets of them. What cost these wars? 50% of the human population devastated in just the first few months of the 1-year war. How small are human lives, that billions upon billions can die, trillions upon trillions can be spent to execute them. And what must be so worthwhile that the likes of the Zavis and the Earth Federation can feel comfortable making that blood trade to get? Because the only thing that I can see them getting out of all this mess is the ability to continue a system wherein they need not ever care about the human suffering caused by their recklessness. There's this meme that floats around the Gundam fandom, maybe you've seen it. There's a Gundam standing in front of a dude, and the dude is all, "Oh, cool robot!" And the Gundam is firing his beam rifle at the dude, and the beam says, "War is bad" on it, as it arcs over the dude's head. Pretty straightforward. The guy's too enthralled by the robot toy to really internalize what his favorite show is trying to tell him, and the message quite literally goes over his head. It's ironic, given how much the franchise continues to make its bank off the back of merchandising these war machines as memorabilia and playthings, something I made note of in my Valkyrie video. And obviously, I'm not one to judge on the issue of toys, but I feel like this meme doesn't really capture the full picture. The toys somewhat trivialize the message at best, and bastardize it at worst. And if you don't learn from Gundam what it's trying to teach you, if you don't move beyond the intellectual baby food of war is bad, then you're not really getting what you're supposed to out of it, because it's still just a fun game with cool space toys. Certainly, war is bad, but wars continue to happen at the behest of those who don't fight in them. Wars continue to happen because someone somewhere views the well-being of their fellow humans as insignificant compared to the profit. Wars continue to happen because we can't stop seeing each other as merely bugs. And I don't think it will require any new type bullshit to resolve this. It'll merely take us moving beyond the metal that binds us, and recognizing each other as human. Gundam is a subversion of the super robot, the genre which, after all, is inspired by the atom bomb. It's an undercutting of the optimism, a reminder of what leads us again and again into the same horrors that we must repeatedly endure. It is not a failing of our science, of our will and determination. It is a failing of our humanity. There is nothing glamorous or heroic about war. War occurring in the first place is a failure of society. There are no heroes in war, only villains and casualties exploited by such. The great tragedy of war that Gundam reveals is that we do it to ourselves, and we do it over and over again. We don't learn from these occurrences. It all sounds complicated, and it is, but it isn't. The suffering and despair is self-inflicted because rather than seek peace through mutual respect and meeting the needs of everyone, we instead opt for prosperity through the shedding of blood, passing the wealth and the pain down to each new generation so that it can continue indefinitely. There's assholes on both sides, there's innocents and casualties on both sides, and there's someone rubbing their hands in glee somewhere above it all, salivating at the ever-insufficient spoils of exploiting conflict that they have floating in their heads. Even in reaching for the stars, we bring Earth's gravity with us. Even in preaching peace to our children, we are letting them play with plastic toy guns. I love the super robots and the optimism and romanticization of humanity that they bring. Truly I do. Truly I believe in it. Just watch my Gurren Lagann video if you doubt. I couldn't write something like that without feeling it and carrying it deep within my soul. But I recognize the need for self-reflection. I recognize that need to tread cautiously as we hope for a better tomorrow. The real robot genre is a microcosm of that introspection and rejection of repeating the same mistakes that we keep falling for. And it's why I like sharing these ideas with you guys, sharing the kinds of bigger picture thoughts you're not going to get from Gigguk or Arcada. And I hope you come away from this video motivated to re-examine our problems, like I hope you do with all my videos. I hope you find some drive, some deep wish to break the cycles, break the chains, not just for us, but for whoever's next. It's why I keep doing this shit, even if my growth is slow and my content cringe. The future doesn't have to be a cross of iron. Maybe instead of cramming men into systems that turn us into machines, we can build new systems that liberate mankind from Earth's gravity. Maybe if enough of us really start understanding what the art is trying to tell us, we might someday let the toy guns gather dust on the shelf. Oh, Jesus. Remember when my videos were like an hour in length or less? I do. It's probably that damn book's fault. Serves me right for reading. Anyways, as always, thanks for listening, bot buds. Hope some of what I said was worth the while. And if you think it was, maybe you can rocket punch that like button for me. Or even better, maybe fire your beam rifle at the subscribe button so you can catch more of my talkie talks in the future. Though if you do that, you should probably follow up by using your blazing sword on the notifications bell, because sometimes YouTube is funny about stuff like that. And if you think someone else you know might also like and subscribe and ring the bell, you could share this video so we can combine those subscribes to form a bigger robot of a viewer base. Pretty cool idea, right? I'm sure you agree with how cool that sounds, and if you want to vocalize that affirmation, feel free to transform and roll out in the comments section. Maybe you can tell me your favorite Gundam. Though you could just as easily go down there and tell me how dumb I am for being such a hypocrite about robot toys whilst building robot toys in full view of God and everyone. What a self-righteous piece of shit DBiddles is, spending all that money on his stupid plastic trinkets and then getting up on his internet soapbox to preach at length about how bad people are for getting turned on by robot battles. Talk about escaping cycles when all he does is repeat himself ad nauseum. I ought to donate to the Ko-fi link in his video description just so I have more opportunities to ridicule him. Absolutely, viewer, that'd really show me what a dumb motherfucker I am. Incidentally, here's your next opportunity to trash talk me in the comments section. This robot kid I've got on screen now. But until then, Chatbots mission complete. This is DBiddles, signing off. Sayonara, bye-bye.